Salt is so common today that we scarcely notice it. It's on every table, in every kitchen, embedded in snacks and stitched into language. Yet for much of human history, salt was anything but ordinary. It was fought over, taxed, traded, revered, and feared. Empires were built on it. Rebellions rose against it. Salt is not just a seasoning, it's a story, one that stretches across millennia and continents, touching every aspect of civilization from the formation of cities to the foundations of law and culture. This documentary traces the arc of salt's remarkable journey, how a simple mineral shaped the complex world we live in today. Chapter 1. White Gold, the Origins of Salt's Power. Long before oil-fueled machines or gold-measured wealth, salt held sway as the most vital resource on Earth. To modernize, it may seem mundane and unremarkable mineral found on every dining table, but to ancient civilizations, salt was life, health, and most importantly, power. At the most fundamental level, salt is a biological necessity. Sodium is essential to human survival, regulating fluids, enabling nerve transmission, and facilitating muscle contraction. Without it, the body fails. In the natural world, animals have long instinctively sought salt licks and mineral deposits to maintain their health. And early humans too recognized its importance. From the very start, they followed salt-tracing rivers, trekking deserts, and settling near mineral-rich springs. Some of humanity's earliest permanent settlements formed not around fertile fields, but salt. Evidence of salt's significance stretches back tens of thousands of years. In Austria, the prehistoric salt mines of Hallstatt reveal an early and sophisticated extraction industry. As early as 6000 BCE, Neolithic people were carving tunnels into mountains to mine salt. Tools, leather goods, and even human remains preserved by the salt have been discovered, offering a hauntingly intact glimpse into a world where salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was an industry. In Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent, ancient city-states like Ur and Babylon depended on salt both for survival and for trade. Salt was used to preserve food in hot climates where spoilage came quickly. It enabled travel, storage, and trade at distances that would otherwise have been impossible. Salting meat and fish was not a culinary preference. It was the difference between famine and security. Salt's preservative power gave rise to surplus, and surplus allowed for planning, distribution, and the concept of wealth. When people could preserve food, they could store it. When they could store it, they could support larger populations. Cities grew, states formed, armies marched. Salt, invisible but foundational, was behind it all. In ancient Egypt, salt played a critical role not only in daily life, but in the sacred practices of the dead. The process of mummification required natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, to desiccate the body. Without salt, the elaborate rituals of death and afterlife central to Egyptian religion and kingship would not have been possible. Salt was thus not just physical sustenance, but spiritual necessity. In China, records of salt production date back more than 4,000 years. By 800 BCE, the Chinese were boiling brine from salt wells, an innovation that foreshadowed later chemical and industrial advances. Salt became a vital part of Chinese culture, influencing cuisine, medicine, and governance. It would later become a key source of state revenue, something explored in depth in later chapters. Salt also left its mark in language. The word salary derives from the Latin salarium, believed to refer to payments made to Roman soldiers either in salt or for salt. The phrase "worth his salt" echoes this origin. Entire economies were once structured around the mineral. It moved across deserts on camel caravans and crossed oceans aboard merchant ships. Salt was heavy, valuable, difficult to store, and utterly indispensable. Even in the ancient Americas, salt was prized. The Maya extracted salt from coastal lagoons and transported it inland, where it became a form of tribute and trade. In the Andes, the Inca built entire infrastructures around salt extraction, storing it in state warehouses and distributing it throughout their vast mountainous empire. Salt also had ritual significance. In Japan, it was and remains a symbol of purification, often sprinkled at the entrances of homes and businesses, or on the ring before a sumo match. In Judaism and Islam, salt features in covenantal and cleansing traditions. In medieval Europe, salt was believed to ward off evil, and its spillage was considered a bad omen, echoes of which persist today when we toss salt over the left shoulder. Its influence extended to technology as well. Ancient salt production led to innovations in pottery, as clay vessels were needed to evaporate brine. In some regions, salt was used in early metallurgy and tanning. The industry created specialists, miners, traders, carriers, and with them social stratification. Salt helped form the first outlines of professional and class-based societies. To the ancient world, salt was more than a commodity. It was a building block of civilization. It connected nutrition to economy, religion to governance, survival to expansion. It allowed people to preserve food, but more than that, it allowed them to preserve power. This invisible mineral, crystalline, colorless, and unassuming, was in truth a foundation stone. Where salt appeared, people gathered. Where it flowed, cities flourished. Where it was scarce, wars ignited. The story of salt is not just one of science or sustenance. It is a story of control, of ingenuity, of empire. In the chapters that follow, we will explore how salt created great routes of exchange, how it defined the ambitions of kings, and how it eventually became the fuel for resistance and revolution. But first, we turn to the roads it carved, the trade routes that carried this white gold across deserts, mountains, and seas. Chapter 2: Salt Routes and Salt Empires. As salt became indispensable to early civilizations, its value extended far beyond biology and preservation. It became the foundation of vast and intricate networks of trade. Salt routes, long before highways and railroads, etched paths across continents. These were not just channels for mineral exchange, but arteries through which culture, wealth, and power flowed. Wherever salt was produced in abundance, civilizations sprang up. Wherever it was scarce, they reached out, forming alliances, building roads, and conquering new territory. In North Africa, the Sahara Desert seems an unlikely place to find bustling trade. Yet it became home to one of the most significant salt routes in history. Salt mined from Tagaza and Taudeni in present-day Mali and Mauritania was carried by camel caravans across the desert to the markets of Timbuktu and Gao. In return, gold and goods from the sub-Saharan kingdoms flowed north. The wealth of the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires, whose names still evoke grandeur, was built not only on gold, but equally on salt. Salt was so valuable in West Africa that it was often traded ounce for ounce with gold. For desert communities, salt was life, and kings rose and fell with control over this mineral. To the east, China developed a highly organized and state-controlled salt trade. The Chinese monopoly on salt was one of the first government-run industries in world history. During the Tang and Song dynasties, the state controlled salt wells, levied taxes, and issued salt certificates. This revenue was so vital that at times it contributed more to the imperial treasury than land taxes. The construction of salt canals and the regulation of salt merchants helped finance dynastic expansion, bureaucracy, and infrastructure. Salt not only helped feed the people, it sustained the empire. In the Mediterranean world, salt was central to Roman expansion. Rome built roads specifically to facilitate the movement of salt from the coast to inland cities. The famous Via Salaria, the Salt Road, enabled the transportation of salt from the salt pans near Ostia to the heart of the empire. Roman soldiers, in fact, were sometimes paid in salt or given allowances to buy it. This practice led to the term salary, derived from the Latin salarium. Roman control over salt was not simply practical, it was a statement of imperial dominance. The ability to provide salt to its population was as essential as bread and water. Across Europe, salt-producing regions wielded disproportionate power. Venice, the maritime powerhouse of the Middle Ages, rose to wealth and prominence in part due to its control over salt. The Venetian Republic maintained a strict monopoly, exporting salt across the Adriatic and beyond. Salt warehouses lined the canals. Salt taxes funded its fleet, and disputes over salt routes contributed to military campaigns and naval wars. Farther north, the Celts mined salt in what is now Central Europe and distributed it across the continent. The city of Salzburg in Austria, literally Salt Fortress, owes its name and wealth to the mineral. In France, regions like Brittany and Languedoc developed sophisticated salt harvesting techniques using sea pans and wind evaporation, setting the stage for the extensive Gabel tax system that would come centuries later. Salt also shaped the geography of trade itself. Caravanseries fortified inns along trade routes sprang up along salt roads, providing shelter and security for traders. Markets and cities blossomed at the junctions of major salt arteries. Salt linked empires through diplomatic marriages, trade treaties, and war. In every corner of the ancient world, salt acted as a quiet but potent force, guiding the flow of wealth and conflict. Cultural and religious exchanges rode these salt roads too. Merchants didn't just carry minerals, they carried stories, gods, and ideas. Along the trans-Saharan routes, Islam spread from North Africa into West Africa, establishing religious centers and schools. In Asia, Confucian texts and Buddhist scrolls traveled alongside salt sacks. Salt, so ordinary in appearance, enabled the extraordinary circulation of culture. In time, entire empires would be shaped around salt, not merely as a product, but as a strategic asset. Controlling the means of production, securing trade routes, and defending monopolies became central concerns for rulers from Mali to Ming China. Salt-fed cities, enriched kings, and funded temples and armies alike. In this chapter, we see that the story of salt is also the story of networks. Roads of salt were more than dusty paths. They were the lifelines of empire. And in the next chapter, we'll examine how this control over salt and the desire to break free from that control sparked resistance, rebellion, and revolution across the globe. Chapter 3. Salt and the struggle for control. As the centuries wore on, salt's importance only grew, but so too did the tensions surrounding its control. What had once been a prized resource became a tool of authority, taxation, and oppression. Governments recognized that whoever controlled the salt controlled the people, and when that control tightened too far, it sparked some of the most famous revolts in human history. Few episodes better illustrate this than the story of the French gabelle. Instituted in the 14th century, the gabelle was a deeply unpopular salt tax imposed by the French monarchy. It varied dramatically by region, with some provinces exempt and others heavily burdened. More than just a levy, it was a legal obligation. Citizens were forced to purchase fixed quantities of salt at inflated state prices. The gabelle became a symbol of inequality and state excess, and resistance to it simmered for centuries. Smuggling became widespread. Faux saunier illegal salt dealers were often regarded as folk heroes. By the time of the French Revolution in 1789, the gabelle was one of the most hated institutions in the land, and its abolition became a rallying cry for reform. The power of salt to provoke political upheaval was not confined to Europe. In colonial India, British control of salt production and distribution became a flashpoint for resistance. The British East India Company and later the Raj imposed strict laws that prevented Indians from harvesting or selling salt independently. All salt was to be purchased from the British, who taxed it heavily. This monopoly over a basic necessity stung not only economically but symbolically. It was a daily reminder of foreign domination. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi launched the Salt March, a 240-mile journey on foot from Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal village of Dandi. There, in defiance of British law, he picked up a handful of salt from the shore. This simple act ignited a national movement. Thousands joined in civil disobedience, making salt and defying colonial regulations. The British arrested more than 60,000 people, including Gandhi himself. But the movement had already struck a powerful blow. Salt had become the banner of independence. In the American Revolution, salt was once again a quiet but critical battlefield. The British Navy targeted colonial saltworks to cripple food preservation efforts for the Continental Army. With access to salt disrupted, American soldiers and citizens struggled to store meat and fish, especially in the southern colonies. In response, new saltworks were developed inland, and communities pooled resources to maintain the war effort. Salt became not only a strategic asset, but a symbol of American self-reliance. Salt's role in the American Civil War further underscored its strategic value. Both Union and Confederate forces targeted salt works as key military objectives. In Virginia and Georgia, massive facilities were constructed to supply salt to Confederate troops and civilians. When Union armies captured or destroyed these plants, it wasn't merely a blow to logistics, it demoralized entire regions. Confederate newspapers reported salt shortages as crises, and the lack of preservation capacity worsened food scarcity. In other parts of the world, similar patterns played out. In East Africa, colonial powers like Germany and Britain monopolized salt in order to extract profit and suppress local trade. In Southeast Asia, salt taxes helped fuel resistance movements against imperial rule. Wherever salt was essential, and it was everywhere, it became a means of leverage. And wherever it was controlled too tightly, rebellion followed. Salt had thus transformed from a unifier of early civilizations into a pressure point between rulers and the ruled. Its ubiquity made it powerful, and its necessity made it dangerous in the wrong hands. Taxes on salt were rarely just about revenue, they were about visibility. Unlike other levies that might be buried in land deeds or trade records, a salt tax touched everyone every day. Every meal reminded people of their subjugation. These chapters of resistance highlight how a mineral so small, so common, could rally entire populations. Salt in these moments became a metaphor for dignity, for autonomy, for justice. The struggle for salt was never just about the mineral. It was about the right to control the essentials of life. As we look to the modern era in the next chapter, we'll explore how salt's role has changed. No longer central to political revolts or imperial trade, salt has shifted into new industries and symbolic spaces. But its legacy, carved into the pages of history through struggle and transformation, remains. Chapter 4. Salt's legacy in the modern world. As the industrial age dawned and new technologies reshaped societies, salt's place in the world began to shift. No longer the exclusive property of kings or the cause of revolts, it gradually lost its political volatility. But it never lost its significance. Instead, salt transitioned into new domains, economic, scientific, and symbolic, where its legacy endures in quiet but powerful ways. The most significant transformation in salt's role came with the advent of refrigeration. The ability to keep food cold revolutionized preservation, diminishing the necessity of salt as a primary preservative. Where once salt had been essential for storing meat and fish, now iceboxes and later electric refrigerators took over. Salt's economic importance declined, but its industrial utility surged. Today, only a small percentage of the world's salt production is used for food. The majority goes to de-icing roads, chemical processing, water treatment, and industrial manufacturing. Salt is a key ingredient in the production of chlorine and caustic soda chemicals used in plastics, paper, glass, and textiles. Its uses are omnipresent yet hidden, embedded in the infrastructure of modern life. Yet even as its physical form blends into the background, salt remains culturally resonant. Linguistically, we still speak of someone being worth their salt, a nod to its ancient value. Sharing salt at a meal continues to symbolize hospitality and trust in many cultures. In rituals around the world, salt retains its spiritual function, used to purify spaces, ward off evil, and seal covenants. It is at once elemental and eternal. In religious traditions, salt continues to occupy sacred space. In Christianity, salt represents preservation and purity. Jesus called his disciples the salt of the earth. In Judaism, it is used in Sabbath rituals and symbolizes the enduring nature of God's covenant. In Shintoism, salt purifies and protects. Despite the technological revolutions of modernity, salt has not been forgotten. It has simply changed form. In cuisine, salt remains the foundation of flavor. From artisanal sea salt harvested by hand to specialty salt smoked, infused, or crystallized in unique shapes, chefs around the world treat it with reverence. Far from being relegated to the background, Salt in modern cooking is a celebration of craft, terroir, and sensory depth. At a global level, salt production continues to be a major industry. Countries like China, the United States, and India dominate output. Massive solar evaporation ponds stretch across coastal plains. Underground rock salt mines operate like small cities. While the political urgency around salt has faded, its role in economic development remains essential, especially in areas where large-scale infrastructure projects rely on its industrial uses. The story of salt has also entered museums, documentaries, and educational curricula. Former saltworks have been preserved as heritage sites. In Hallstatt, Austria, and Cheshire, England, tourists walk through ancient mines that once fueled empires. These spaces remind us that salt, though simple, carries the weight of millennia. Even in geopolitics, salt has made a quiet return. Climate change has increased the use of salt for winter roads in colder countries, raising concerns about environmental damage. Excessive salting can affect freshwater ecosystems and soil health. In this, salt once again becomes a resource that must be managed wisely, useful, necessary, but never without consequence. In the end, salt's journey mirrors humanity's own evolution. From necessity to abundance, from sacred to industrial, from catalyst of revolution to quietly essential mineral, salt has adapted alongside us. It no longer builds empires, but it remains embedded in every corner of life, from the food we eat to the roads we travel, from the rituals we cherish to the industries we depend on. It is a humble crystal with a mighty history. And though it no longer sits at the center of global conflict, salt continues to connect us to our ancestors, our cultures, and our shared need for survival. Salt is no longer a currency of kings or a flashpoint of protest, but its influence remains. It shaped the trajectory of early civilizations, empowered the growth of empires, and ignited movements for freedom. In doing so, it carved itself into the foundations of history. Even as its role has changed, salt continues to bind us through memory, tradition, and need. Today, salt is everywhere and often overlooked. Yet in its quiet, crystalline form, it still holds the echoes of the roads it paved and the revolutions it inspired. In understanding salt's story, we gain a deeper appreciation for how something so small could leave such an enduring imprint on the world.